minutes. Let me see, it's 2, 4, 6, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28. Okay, you know what? I started a 15-minute timer over here. Yes, finally. I have a timer set over here this time. No, we're just gonna read for 15 minutes and then, yeah. Let's fire away. Team Musk would grow to include Mike Griffin and meet with the Russians 3 times over a period of 4 months. The group set up a few meetings with companies like NPO, Lavochkin, which had space probes intended for Mars and Venus for the Russian Federal Space Agency, and Cosmotron, a commercial rocket launcher. The appointments all seemed to go the same way, following Russian decorum. The Russians, who often skip breakfast, would ask to meet around 11 a.m. at their offices for an early lunch. Then there would be small talk for an hour or more as the meeting attendees picked over a spread of sandwiches, sausages, and, of course, vodka. At some point, during this process, Griffin usually started to lose his patience. He suffers fools very poorly, Cantrell said. He's looking around and wondering when we're going to get down to effing business. The answer was not soon. After lunch came a lengthy smoking and coffee drinking period. Once all the tables were cleared, the Russian in charge would turn to Musk and ask, "What is it you're interested in buying?" The big wind-up may not have bothered Musk as much as if the Russians had taken him more seriously. They looked. One of their chief designers bid on me and Elon Musk because he thought we were full of shit. The most intense meeting occurred in an ornate, neglected pre-revolutionary building near downtown Moscow. The vodka shot started to space, to America, while Musk sat on $20 million, which he hoped would be enough to buy 3 ICBMs that could be retooled to go to space. Buzzed from the vodka, Musk asked point blank how much a missile would cost. They replied, $8 million. Musk countered, offering $8 million for 2. They sat there and looked at him, Cantrell said, and said something like, "Young boy, no." He also intimated that he didn't have the money. At this point, Musk had decided the Russians were either not serious about doing business or determined to part a dot-com millionaire from as much of his money as possible. He stormed out of the meeting. The Team Musk mood could not have been worse. It was near the end of February 2002, and they went outside to hail a cab and drove straight to the airport, surrounded by the snow and dreck of the Moscow winter. Inside the cab, no one talked. Musk had come to Russia filled with optimism about putting on a great show for mankind and was now leaving exasperated and disappointed by human nature. The Russians were the only ones with rockets that could possibly fit within Musk's budget. It was a long drive, Cantrell said. We sat there in silence, looking at the Russian peasants shopping in the snow. The somber mood lingered all the way to the plane until a drink cart arrived. "You always feel particularly good when the wheels lift off in Moscow," Cantrell said. "It's like, my God, I made it." So Griffin and I got drinks and clinked our glasses. Musk sat in the row in front of them, typing on his computer. We're thinking, effing nerd, what can he be doing now? At which point Musk wheeled around and flashed a spreadsheet he'd created. "Hey guys," he said, "I think we can build this rocket ourselves." Griffin and Cantrell had downed a couple of drinks by this time and were too deflated to entertain a fantasy. They knew all too well the stories of gung-ho millionaires who thought they could conquer space only to lose their fortunes. Just the year before, Andrew Beale, a real estate and finance whiz in Texas, folded his aerospace company after having poured millions into a massive test site. We're thinking, yeah, you and who's... For me, I will use one profanity per reading because it's 2026, that's no excuse, but for the people who don't mind. Fucking army, Cantrell said. But Elon says, "No, I'm serious. I have this spreadsheet." Musk passed his laptop over to Griffin and Cantrell, and they were dumbfounded. The document detailed the cost of the materials needed to build, assemble, and launch a rocket. According to Musk's calculations, he could undercut existing launch companies by building a modest-sized rocket that would cater to a part of the market that specialized in carrying smaller satellites and research payloads to space. The spreadsheet also laid out the hypothetical performance characteristics of the rocket in fairly impressive detail. I said, "Elon, where did you get this?" Cantrell said. Musk had spent months studying the aerospace industry and the physics behind it. From Cantrell and others, he'd borrowed rocket propulsion elements, fundamentals of astrodynamics, and aerothermodynamics of gas turbine and rocket propulsion, along with several more seminal texts. Musk had reverted to his childhood state as a devourer of information and had emerged from this meditative process with the realization that rockets could and should be made much cheaper than what the Russians were offering. Forget the mice. Forget the plant with its own video feed growing or possibly dying on Mars. Musk would inspire people to think about exploring space again by making it cheaper to explore space. As word traveled around the space community about Musk's plans, there was a collective ho-hum. People like Zubrin had seen the show many times before. There was a string of zillionaires that got there was a string of zillionaires, we got to quotes. There was a string of zillionaires that got sold a good story by an engineer, Zubrin said. Combine my brains and your money, and we can build a rocket ship that will be profitable and open up the space frontier. The techies usually ended up spending the rich guy's money for 2 years, and then the rich guy gets bored and shuts the thing down. With Elon, everyone gave a sigh and said, oh, well, we could have spent $10 million to send up the mice, but instead he'll spend hundreds of millions and probably fail like all the others that preceded him. While well aware of the risk tied to starting a rocket company, Musk had at least one reason to think he might succeed where others had failed. That reason's name was Tom Mueller. Mueller grew up the son of a logger in the tidy Idaho town of St. Mary's, where he developed a reputation as an oddball. While the rest of the kids were outside exploring the woods in winter, Mueller stayed warm in the library reading books or watching Star Trek at his house. He also tinkered. Walking to grade school one day, Mueller discovered a smashed clock in an alley and turned it into a pet project. Each day he fixed some part of the clock, a gear, a spring, until he got it working. A similar thing happened with the family's lawnmower, which Mueller disassembled one afternoon on the front lawn for fun. My dad came home and was so mad because he thought he'd always buy a new mower, Mueller said. But I put it back together and it ran. Mueller then got stuck on rockets. He started buying mail order kits and following the instructions to build small rockets. Rather quickly, Mueller graduated to constructing his own devices. At the age of 12, he crafted a mock-up space shuttle that could be attached to a rocket, sent up into the air, and then glide back to the ground. For a science project a couple of years later, Mueller borrowed his dad's oxyacetylene welding equipment to make a rocket engine prototype. Mueller cooled the device by placing it upside down in a coffee can full of water. I could run it like that all day long, and invented equally creative ways to measure its performance. The machine was good enough for Mueller to win a couple of regional science fair competitions and end up at an international event. That's where I promptly got my ass kicked, Mueller said. Tall, lanky, and with a rectangular face, Mueller is an easy-going sort who muddled through college for a bit, teaching his friends how to make smoke bombs, and then eventually settled down and did well as a mechanical engineering student. Fresh out of college, he worked for Hughes Aircraft on satellites. It wasn't rockets, but it was close, and then went to TRW Space and Electronics, but it was the latter half of the 1980s, and Ronald Reagan's Star Wars program had the space gears dreaming about kinetic weapons and all sorts of mayhem. At TRW, Mueller experimented with crazy types of propellants and oversaw the development of the company's TR-106 engine, a giant machine fueled by liquid oxygen and hydrogen. As a hobby, Mueller hung out with a couple of hundred amateur rocketry buffs in the Reaction Research Society, a group formed in 1943 to encourage the building and firing of rockets. On the weekends, Mueller traveled out to the Mojave Desert with the other RRS members to push the limits of amateur machines. Mueller was one of the club's standouts, able to build things that actually worked and could experiment with some of the more radical concepts that were quashed by his conservative bosses at TRW. His crowning achievement was an 80-pound engine that could produce 13,000 pounds of thrust, and earned accolades as the world's largest liquid-fueled rocket engine built by an amateur. I still keep the rockets hanging in my garage, Mueller said. In January 2002, Mueller was hanging out in the workshop of John Garvey, who had left a job at the aerospace company McDonnell Douglas to start building his own rockets. Garvey's facility was in Huntington Beach, where he rented an industrial space about the size of a 6-car garage. The two men were fiddling around with the 80-pound engine when Garvey mentioned that a guy named Elon Musk might be stopping by. The amateur rocketry scene is tight, and it was Cantrell who recommended that Musk check out Garvey's workshop and see Mueller's designs. On a Sunday, Musk arrived with a pregnant Justine, wearing a stylish black leather trench coat and looking like a high-paid assassin. Mueller had the 80-pound engine on his shoulder and was trying to bolt it to a support structure when Musk began prepping him up with questions. He asked me how much thrust it had, Mueller said. He wanted to know if I had ever worked on anything bigger. I told him that, yeah, I'd worked on a 650,000-pound thrust engine at TRW and knew every part of it. Mueller set the engine down and tried to keep up with Musk's interrogation. How much would that big engine cost? Musk asked, and Mueller told him TRW built it for about $12 million. Musk shot back, yeah, but how much could you really do it for? Mueller ended up chatting with Musk for hours. The next weekend, Mueller invited Musk to his house to continue their discussion. Musk knew he had found someone who really knew the ins and outs of making rockets. After that, Musk introduced Mueller to the rest of his roundtable of space experts in their stealthy meetings. The caliber of the people impressed Mueller, who had turned down past job offers from Beale and the other budding space magnates because of their borderline insane ideas. Musk, by contrast, seemed to know what he was doing, weeding out the naysayers, meeting and forming a crew of bright, committed engineers. We're gonna end off here. Thanks for listening.